Hello and welcome back to the third lab in the Bayesian machine learning module on the Foundations of Modern Machine Learning course. In this lab, we are going to review what we have learned in the previous lab about Bayes classifiers and naive Bayes, and we are going to extend that on different types of data. In particular, we are going to try to extend our formulation on continuous inputs, continuous space inputs, and on natural language inputs, so trying to classify text. We'll begin by first importing all of our libraries and downloading the data, and next we recollect the example that we have already seen in the previous lab, which is the example of a bunch of data points sampled from Gaussian distributions and belonging to two different classes. In this example, we saw that our histograms are formed such, and the point at which the blue histogram overtakes the red histogram, that is, it is more probable, that is, the blue histograms are higher, we classify those blocks of the histogram as blue and all of the other parts as red. However, there is a problem with this histogramming approach. The problem is that this histogramming approach is very prone to noise. If there are a few extra data points which come in these bins, they are going to shift our boundary. You can see in this example that when we analytically computed this green boundary, it is actually more to the right of what we would expect from the histograms that we have drawn. This particular blue histogram is actually a noisy estimate, and if you try to compute this analytically by fitting Gaussians to both of these classes, then you would notice that the green boundary is indeed correct. We have to come up with a method of dealing with the noise of these methods, since the number of data points that we have in these Bayesian machine learning scenarios might be very few, and therefore our estimates of the boundary should be, we should be precautious to ensure that they are not noisy. The simplest approach, obviously, and the best approach is to fit Gaussians to both of the data points, the red and the blue data points, and then try to compute the analytical intersection and state that that is the place where the blue class begins. Notice also that if both of these classes are spread, it may happen that in one of the bins the blue histogram is higher than the red, in the next bin the red histogram is higher than the blue, and again in the third bin the blue histogram is higher than the red. And if we try to classify purely based on histograms, then we would have alternating patches of red and blue, which is obviously against our intuition and incorrect as a solution. So approximating the entire data set with histogram helps us, with Gaussian fits, helps us avoid the problems with respect to noise and helps us regularize the estimate that we have of the class boundaries. Alright, so we are going to use SKLearn exclusively for this Gaussian fitting, and we are going to instantiate the Gaussian naive Bayes class, which will do exactly what we described above. And we'll feed it the input, which we have named X reshaped, and we'll get it to predict the values of predict the classes of the iris dataset. So as you have already seen, that the iris dataset is a dataset of petal width, petal length, sepal width, and sepal length. And given any two features, it's reasonably clear how to separate the respective classes. In this particular choice of features, we can see that the few examples that we have are pretty well separated. The blue and the green classes are slightly harder to separate than the red and the green, or the red and the blue. However, we'll try to do that with the Bayes classifier. We have already seen that other classifiers are able to do this, but the Gaussian Bayes classifier should help provide us a better explainability of our method and quantified uncertainty. Quantified uncertainty is an important thing in machine learning problems, where if you have a point right along this boundary somewhere over here, we should know that maybe this is a hard guess to make, and if we have classified this as a green point and it's on the boundary between the green and the blue points, maybe we have classified incorrectly, however good a classifier we are, and we should ensure that these are low confidence estimates and we refer them to a better classifier or a human expert agent. So here you can see that we run the code, and this code is just to plot the data. We have already run the classification over here using Gaussian naive Bayes.fit, and we have gotten a prediction on all of our testing examples over here. So with gnb.predict, these follow the standard scikit-learn API. And now you can see over here that we have plotted the confidence contours of the Gaussian naive Bayes estimate. So essentially what we have modeled is our data as being sampled from one of three Gaussians. There is a Gaussian over here, and the places of equal probability, that is the highest probability being the innermost contour, are joined with a line, and so on. The contours as we go outwards in every class fall lower and lower in probability. So you can notice that this area belongs to the red class, whereas this entire large area belongs to the green class, with probability falling off again. And finally this area over here belongs to the blue class, and then there is some sort of intersection between these two classes over here, as the probability of both of them fall off to a pretty low value. So this helps us explain what is the probability of every single estimate, and why is the probability so. Is the probability more variant along the x-axis or the y-axis, so we are able to blame the features. So like you can notice that if the Gaussian is most spread along the falling x comma y axis, more along the x-axis and less along the y-axis, then maybe we can state that the feature along the x-axis, whatever it is, sepal width, sepal length, is the more important of the more variant of the two features for that particular class. The entire set of varieties belong to the same class, whereas if the whatever feature the class changes on is the one which was more crucial to classifications, so that would be the one which is slightly more along the y-axis and less of a positive x-axis component. We can also clearly look at this and say that obviously the higher values of x correspond to the blue class, and middle values of x correspond to green, and lower values of x correspond to red. Alright, so that was all we have on fitting Gaussians to regularize our estimates, so that we don't keep flipping between classes on every histogram point, and this becomes computationally feasible to do, because maintaining histograms on very high dimensional data is practically infeasible, because you will never have enough data points for filling out those histograms. And finally, these Gaussian fits help us understand our data better, of course. Next, we'll move to applying Bayes classifiers to text, and here we have downloaded what is called archive.db, which is a set of papers, their tags, which is which subject they belong to, and some descriptions and text that we have on those papers. So this has been downloaded from the paper hosting service archive. So let's initialize some of our hyperparameters. These hyperparameters are open to tuning, and we encourage you to play with these. These hyperparameters contribute to how the pre-processing step is done, and samples comp is the number of samples we will be drawing from computer science, sample stat is the number of samples we will be drawing from statistics, and word count threshold is how many times at least a word should appear so that it gets put into the dictionary. So all of the words which appear less than one time, which never appear, obviously should not end up affecting our final classes, and maybe you can raise this so that you only rank based on words which were seen frequently enough so that there is some meaningful estimate to be made. And finally, word length threshold helps us filter out ultra small words like is, and, the, etc., sort of stop word removal. So this helps us make our estimate more certain. Alright, so we first take a look at the data set that we have, and over here you can see that you have ID, which is not particularly relevant. We have summary, tag, title, and keywords. Summary, title, and keywords can be an input to our data set, and the tag, which is computer science and statistics, we have already filtered by these two tags, by the way, are what we have to classify, the output. So these three columns can be the input, and this single column will be the output. So right now we'll not take those three columns as input, rather we'll just take the keywords as input. So let's do that. Let's take a look at our keywords column, and let's try to process that as the input X. We also recommend that if you are playing around with this code base, then please feel free to add the title and other parts of the data set to the classification task and see if the output is better or worse. Alright, so here we are again going to use the same method that we used before. We have for every single word the probability that this word occurs, and for every single output tag or subject we have the probability with which this subject occurs. So those are the prior probabilities. We have seen that we have set them with 2500 and 3500. The relative probabilities have been set. So the probability of some paper belonging to computer science or belonging to statistics is known, and the probability of each word is known, and the probability of a word occurring if the paper is in computer science is known, because we can count the words whenever they occur in computer science papers, and we can normalize by the total number of words in computer science. However, what we want to find out is the probability of a paper being of computer science tag when we see a given word. And then, since we'll see a lot of different words in the paper, we want to take the product of these probabilities over all of the words to find out which class it belongs to. If the probability of product of probabilities for every single word of computer science, the paper belonging to the computer science class is higher than that of it belonging to the statistics class, then we'll call it a computer science paper, otherwise a statistics paper. So first we generate our data set as a dictionary. So we generate this dictionary and then we count vectorize all of our words, and we filter those which fall below the word count threshold, and we filter those which have a length below the word length threshold, and so on. And we plot a small view of what are the counts of different words and how do they stack up computer science versus statistics. So let's take a look over here. I think the first class is the blue class is computer science and the red class is statistics, because these bars in order are CS and statistics. So let's take a look. So performance is a common word in computer science papers because a lot of computer science papers evaluate performance, whereas in statistics it's common but not as much. Similarly, if we take a look over here, information, then information occurs in 691 times in computer science papers, whereas it occurs only 391 times in statistics papers. Alright, so here we write out explicitly our Bayes rule, which is the probability of a subject given the word is equal to probability of word given the subject times the probability of the subject divided by the probability of the word. So to compute the prior probabilities of both of the subjects, all we do is we take the value counts and we normalize it by the length of the data set. So this would be 3500 plus 2500 would be the length of the data set, which is a total of 6000 elements, and the value of the prior probability of computer science would be 3500 by 6000, and that of statistics would be 2500 by 6000, because we know that to be the true distribution of elements in the data set. This is again a key power of Bayesian machine learning, that we can model this as prior probabilities, and this should help us guide our model that there are more statistics papers than there are computer science papers. Sorry, there are more computer science papers than there are statistics papers. Next we compute the evidence, and the evidence is computed as follows. So we take the counts for every single word in computer science, and we take the counts of every single word in statistics, and then we just normalize these counts on the whole. So we normalize the counts of we normalize by the total count of computer science papers. So this would be the number of papers in which this word appears and it was computer science divided by the total number of computer science papers. So essentially the percentage of computer science papers in which a particular word appears is the evidence. Next we compute the likelihood, and the likelihood is just for every single word the counts with which it appears in computer science plus the counts with appears in statistics divided by the total number of papers. So this is essentially the number of, or the percentage of papers in which a certain word appears. This is the raw likelihood of a word appearing, the prior of the word you can call it. So now we have the prior, the evidence, and the likelihood. The next thing that we are going to do is we are going to compute the posterior, which is the probability of the subject given the word for every single word which occurs in the paper, and then we are going to take the product of these probabilities. So if we know P of computer science given some word, let's say information, and we know P of computer science given some word, let's say technical, then the net probability of computer science will be a product of these two. because we have both of these as reasonably independent observations. Now this is not perfectly true, but that is what is the naive part of naive Bayes, that we are modeling that all of our features are independent. We are not able to model any correlations between the features. Because there exist correlations between these features, our estimates will be slightly incorrect, but that is the price you pay for lower compute requirements of naive Bayes. And if you want to avoid that, then you would have to go to something called optimal Bayes, which would be discussed in one of the lectures. So we compute the posterior probabilities for every single word. We call this the marginal probabilities, because they are the independent probabilities for every single one of our words, the contributions for every single one of the words. And then the joint probability would be the product of all of these probabilities. And since this is numerically difficult to compute, what we do is we take the log of every single probability, converting the product into a sum. So the log of product of several things is equal to the sum of the logs of those things. So instead of computing the true probabilities, we have computed the log of those probabilities, and this is a numerically stable estimate, because adding a bunch of different numbers together is not that hard, but taking the product of a large amount of small numbers will essentially make this vanish to zero and cause floating point issues on our computer. So now we have the log probability of something being a subject, and since we don't need to use the probabilities directly, we can just compare these log probabilities, and if it's higher for computer science, we say that computer science is our tag, and otherwise we say that statistics is our tag. We notice that with this method, we get a 81% accuracy. There is one more important thing to note here, that if there are no counts of this word, that is, we never see a word in the entire dictionary, then we are going to assign, so for one of the two subjects, for computer science or statistics, then what we are going to see is there is going to be a zero probability associated, because one of these because none of the examples in our data set had one of these words in some of the classes. And this is going to cause a numerical error because log of 0 is undefined. And we are going to solve this using this little piece of code over here. We are going to boost the count artificially to at least 1. And this is something called smoothing, label smoothing, that we talk about briefly in the later part of this lab. So now we have computed the probability of it belonging to either class computer science or statistics. We see that we are 81.3% correct, which is pretty good. We are not sure that this is a very good estimate of our accuracy, and adding more examples we may have lower or higher accuracy, but given the complexity of our method, it is a reasonable estimate to have. Next, we want to have explainable AI, since we have invested so much into probabilistic methods in Bayesian machine learning. So here is the function which does the explanations. What the explanations are going to be is essentially that we are going to compute the marginal probabilities because of each of the words again, and then we are going to see which is the word which contributed the maximal difference in the marginal probabilities. That is, the marginal probability it contributed to computer science was a lot more than to statistics, or vice versa. So here we have a bunch of code which just does HTML outputting. It computes the the marginal posterior probabilities, and it computes, it puts this together into an HTML piece of text so that we can print it on the screen with colored annotations. And over here you can see a bunch of different examples. So here you see an example where we got the answer correct and the true tag was computer science. So in this example we can see that words like adversarial, promising, technique, discriminators, these are computer sciencey words, and these helped us guide ourselves towards the correct answer, whereas words like distribution, generative, instability are used more commonly in statistics papers, and therefore those were the words which are misguiding us. Words like discriminator go towards statistics and discriminators goes towards computer science, and we are unsure if this is a good thing or a bad thing, because in computer science maybe discriminators are used in the algorithmic context and therefore they are more commonly used in the plural context, whereas there may be discriminator functions in statistics. where they will be used in a singular context, but maybe we do not want to have these sorts of subtle features. So stemming the words and other types of NLP techniques which help us deal with the different word forms might also be used to improve our classification ability. Next, we take a look at a statistics paper which shows similar traits, and you can explore this in detail. Words like regression, statistical, etc. help you guide towards it being statistics, whereas words like perspective and others guide towards computer science because they appear in those papers more. Efficient strategies, these are definitely computer sciencey words. Next, let's take a look at one of the papers that we got wrong. So this is a paper where we guessed that it's a computer science paper, but it was actually a statistics paper. So we worked off of words like efficiency, progressive, reduction, etc. and we worked against words like non-convex, stochastic, optimization. So these were the words, stochastic, optimization, these were the words which are trying to guide us towards towards it being a statistics paper, but we saw these words like progressive, experiments, demonstrate, computational performance, etc. and we called it a computer science paper, which was incorrect. Now, as a human as well, like reading this prompt, you might be convinced to believe that this is a computer science prompt, and it's very believable that our model makes a mistake on this input. We see the other side of the same thing, which is we predict something as a statistics paper, but it was a computer science paper. So here, words like distributed and exclusive and iterations, these are the words which were pointing towards being computer science, but we are overwhelmed by the number of words which seem statistical, like processing, recognition, unsupervised, classifier. Maybe we have seen these more in statistics terms, and therefore we were misguided. So this will help us understand the features that were the most confusing to our model, and maybe we can improve on these outputs by adding other NLP techniques, giving it to natural language experts and trying to figure out why our model is making these mistakes. Is it because the different word forms, the different tenses, etc. are not handled correctly? Is it because we have too few examples of certain types of papers? Should we improve our data set? And so on. And this is extremely helpful in iterating the quality of our model. Finally, we can just see some of the words which are most common on either side. Computer science has these words which most commonly appear and most strongly contribute to our outputs, and similarly statistics has words like variable, stochastic, statistical, etc. which most commonly appear in statistics papers. Finally, we talked about the problem of some word never appearing in either statistics or computer science papers and it contributing a zero probability. A single word is going to contribute zero probability and therefore is going to kill the chance of it being a statistics paper if it never appears in a statistics paper before. And this is obviously wrong, because a single word should not have this power that if in our input training data set we have never seen it in a statistics paper, any paper that we see it in is not a statistics paper. This is obviously an incorrect inference. So we have to solve that, and in our examples above we have solved that using an additional count of 1. There are other ways to solve this, and the method that is most common is called Laplace smoothing. So what we do essentially is we just add a lambda factor. Instead of adding 1, we add some amount lambda to the counts, and then we compute our estimate so that the probability does not fall off to 0, the log does not become undefined, and we have code working as expected. You can see over here that there are some words which just don't come in any of the what do we have over here? We have so words for whom the evidence is 0, the blue plot is 0, so words like displayed and nonetheless do not appear in papers of a given class. So over here we have printed out the words which never appear in computer science papers and those which never appear in statistics papers, and words like bivariate have never been seen in a computer science paper. But that does not mean that if someone writes bivariate or precisions in a computer science paper, then it's definitely not a CS paper, but rather it's a statistics paper. So yeah, that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to reduce the effect of this p going to 0, and first we do a bit of analysis that how do the counts of words appear for both of the classes, and what we are going to do is we are going to add some small amount lambda to either class, and then we are going to, a small amount in our code is called alpha. So we add this small alpha to one of the two classes, and then we run our code again, and we see that the accuracy of this model is 77%. So the accuracy fell off a little, but this is expected because we saw that we had already used some smoothing with alpha equal to 1 in the previous example, and you can try to play around with different values of alpha and you will get the right amount to have a great accuracy. If you completely switch off Laplace smoothing, which is reduce this to like 0.001, then you are definitely going to see a fall off in the accuracy that we have. But also you may have other problems with computational errors occurring in np.log. Also, having a lower accuracy does not always mean that we are doing worse, because with higher alpha we are essentially trying to filter out the noise because of like the low frequency words which may be acting as noise, and sometimes noise may be helping us, but we still don't want to rely on it too much for making some of our predictions. So yeah, here we have seen how we can use Bayes classifiers to estimate probabilities of any piece of text belonging to one of two or more than two classes, and how do we explain these methods, how do we analyze and improve upon these methods. And I hope you had a nice time understanding the nuances of Bayes classifiers and how to iterate on them and how to use them to build great machine learning applications. That is all we have in this lab. Thanks a lot for listening, and bye bye.